Welcome to everyone. Miss Ana, pakisignal na lang kung okay na lahat. Good morning to everyone. Nandiyan pala si Miss Tetchi. Miss Tetchi Capellan is here pala. Yes. Good morning. She will be one of our reactors with Mr. Peter Lavina. We're waiting for everyone to be in. We have today with us very interesting speakers. Former Secretary Harry Roque, top-notch legal expert. Of course, everybody knows him. And also we have Dr. Henry Lim Liong, later on the business leader and industrialist. We have Mr. George C., analyst and businessman. And of course, Mr. Peter Lavina and Ms. Tetchi Capellan for their reactions. Mr. Peter Lavina is from Mindanao, a civic leader and political leader. Also, Ms. Tetchi Capellan is expert on alternative energy, solar power, very interesting business leader and advocate of better energy for the Philippines. Yes, we're waiting for Dr. Henry Lim. Message lang.
I'm also waiting for if Attorney Roque is already in the Zoom. I already followed up on Austin.
Yes, I'm waiting for them also. While waiting for them, I will just mention lang the topic that we have today to prepare everyone. And if you have questions, please kindly message. The topic we have today, quite interesting, is what are the prospects and implications of the Senate amendments to Public Services Act prohibiting foreign state-owned enterprises in the Philippines. This is interesting and very important for Philippine economic recovery and long-term global competitiveness of the Philippine economy. So thank you very much for the organizers of this Pandesal Forum. We had PHIL-BRICS Strategic Studies led by President Herman Camentong Laurel, with also a top analyst, columnist of Asean Post, and also Sovereign.ph, and also a leader in APCU, Association for Philippine-China Understanding, is Ana Malindog Uy. Thank you for being prime movers. And also we have IDSI think tank, and of course with Pandesal Forum of Kamuning Bakery Cafe. All our media friends later on after the forum, please kindly message, text your addresses. We will send you our usual Pandesal and pastries gifts. We already have Mr. George C. in. We are just waiting for two more speakers. Thank you to everyone. Good morning. Keep safe. We are now using Zoom now, even though because of the pandemic, so we have to be. Once again, thank you. We'll have today as our speakers former Secretary and Presidential Spokesman Harry Roque to discuss mainly the legal implications of this legislation and the proposed Senate amendments on a law called Public Services Act. This will influence and affect foreign investment attractiveness of the Philippines. Then also Dr. Henry Lim Bon Leong, business leader, who will comment on this also, his views. And also Mr. George C., businessman and IDSI think tank analyst. Later on, we have Mr. Peter Lavina, business leader of civic leader of Davao, and also an officer of APCU, one of the co-organizers, Association for Philippine-China Understanding, and the very talented Miss Maria Teresa Capellan. Miss Tetchi Capellan will also give her reaction from the solar energy, alternative energy sector. A very important. Oh, Secretary Harry Roque, welcome.
Yes, is already in.
Yes.
We're just waiting, I think, for Dr. Henry.
Dr. Henry Lim.
Yes, and then we can start.
Yes. While paki-message lang si Dr. Henry Lim and Banji. Welcome, Secretary Harry Roque. He is one of our most outstanding government leaders, dynamic. And for backgrounder na lang, while everybody's waiting, si Secretary Harry Roque is one of the top-notch lawyers in the Philippines. Educated in University of the Philippines, also University of Michigan, Economics and Political Science, plus Master of Laws with merits from the famous London School of Economics. And unknown to so many other people, he is a former congressman with a lot of progressive legislation helping the marginalized sectors and other people. Thank you, Secretary Harry Roque, for coming. We're waiting na lang for Dr. Henry Lim Bon Leong to start. In a few minutes, we will be starting. Thank you to everyone.
Naka-internet. Hindi LTE.
Ayan.
Please be ready with your questions. Just message the chat box or text me for those media friends who know the numbers. Oh. I think he's trying to get into the Zoom. My assistant is talking to him now. Thank you to everyone for joining today. Okay na. Dr. So we are about to begin in a few minutes. The first speaker I will invite is Secretary Harry Roque.
Okay.
Yes. Si Secretary Harry Roque. Welcome, Secretary. You look well despite your very hectic schedule. And many people appreciate you, Secretary Harry Roque, and miss you because people want to see you often on TV explaining all the complicated issues of the world and in the Philippines. So we are happy to see you again today here. Secretary Harry Roque.
Yes.
Thank you, Secretary Harry Roque. For all the people who...
Hi.
Thank you, sir. We are just waiting for Dr. Henry Lim Bon Leong to fix his internet and Zoom. Welcome, Secretary Harry Roque.
Hello.
I think Dr.
Already
Let me know if I'm going to start already, ha?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Secretary Harry. Not many people know pala, si Secretary Harry Roque is grandnephew of one of the best leaders in Philippine politics, si the late nationalist, incorruptible Senate President Jovito Salonga, na he lawyered for him on various important issues. So we have with us very distinguished list of speakers, Secretary Harry Roque, Dr. Henry Limbon Liong, Mr. George C., Mr. Peter Lavina, and Ms. Tetchi Capella, leader of the solar industry, a pioneer in alternative energy in the Philippines. Mr. Lavina is, of course, welcome, Dr. Henry Limbon Liong. We are starting now in a few 1 minute. Good morning to everyone. Welcome to a unique session of Pandesal Forum here. We are going to discuss today prospects and implications of the Senate amendments to Public Services Act PSA prohibiting foreign state-owned enterprises. To start the program, we'd like to invite former secretary, former presidential spokesperson, top-notch legal expert, human rights advocate, former congressman, University of the Philippines professor of law before, graduate of London School of Economics and University of Michigan, one of our most progressive leaders, Secretary Harry Roque, for his opening statement.
Okay, thank you very much, Wilson. It's always a to join you on discussion of burning issues. And I particularly am appreciative of this discussion on proposed amendments to the Public Service Act. No? And let me go to the heart of the beast. No? I have very strong sentiments against a discriminatory provision in the proposed amendments to the Public Service Act, which prohibits the participation of state-owned enterprises. No? We are supposedly liberalizing even the provision of public service, and yet here is an instance where we are expressly discriminating against foreign-owned enterprises. I will actually go straight to the point. This is discriminatory to China, the People's Republic of China, because as you know, many of the companies engaged in public service, including power generation and power distribution, are state-owned enterprises. Now, I submit that this discriminatory provision against state-owned enterprises, particularly from China, is patently unconstitutional. The law, the Constitution itself says that everyone in the Philippines, which includes foreigners, are entitled not only to equal protection of the law, but are entitled to equal protection of the law, no? Which means that persons, both natural and juridical, similarly situated, must be treated alike. There are several tests employed to determine whether or not the equal protection clause is violated. No? The first one is reasonable basis. And one of the elements of under the reasonable basis test is that the distinction to be valid must be based on genuine distinction. It must apply at all times, and it must be germane to the purpose of the law. Now, I do not know why there is a need to discriminate against state enterprises from China when in the first place, this is not germane to the law. The law is about liberalizing the Public Service Act because it is an antiquated law. And the law, in fact, recognizes that if we are to achieve better public service to the people, we need to allow more players into the sector. So it is not, in fact, germane to the purpose of the law. It is contrary to the purpose of the law in allowing, in liberalizing the entry of as many players into the public service sector, because ultimately, it is the consumers that will benefit when there is competition in the public service sector. Now, the reasonable basis test is actually the lowest threshold of all the tests employed to determine whether or not a distinction or a singling out in the law is valid. It is therefore the lowest threshold. But under U.S. jurisprudence, and mind you, we adopted the reasonable basis test from U.S. jurisprudence, there are more stricter requirements in order to sustain the validity of a distinction made by the law. In fact, under the reasonable basis test, all statutes which have singled out individuals, provided we employ the reasonable basis test, is presumed constitutional. And it is for the person challenging the constitutionality of the distinction to show which element is lacking. Now, I think under reasonable basis law test, I have already pointed out, it is not germane to the law, and there is no basis for distinction. Why? Because in the first place, we have already allowed Chinese enterprises to enter the public service. So there is no longer a genuine distinction between existing participants already, which are Chinese-owned state enterprises, and future. So it's very clear that two of the crucial elements in order that a statute be declared as constitutional, applying the reasonable basis test, are already lacking. And therefore, the law is prone to a constitutional challenge. But you see, the basis also for distinction here is patently because of nationality. And although it is not mentioned that it is Chinese businesses or Chinese-owned businesses that are targeted, only Chinese enterprises have state-owned enterprises anyway active in the public sector industry, public service industry. And therefore, we can reasonably infer that it is directed against Chinese-owned state enterprises. Now, under American law, again, I stress that the reasonable basis test is something that we also borrowed under American law. This is now subject to more intense scrutiny. The very first distinction between the reasonable basis test and the nationality test is that all distinctions based on nationality is presumed unconstitutional. It is now for the state to invoke an overriding state interest to sustain a distinction on the basis of nationality. Now, even without mention of China, foreign state enterprises clearly is a distinction based on nationality. Filipino as against non-Filipino. Now, you know, even the bigger problem here is we also have Filipino state-owned enterprises. PNOC is one of them. Right? Ano pa ba? NGCP is now private, but ano pa ba ang mga private dyan? Private na rin yan, no? But PNOC, engaged in public service industry, is a state-owned enterprise too. So, in order to sustain this distinction, you must show an overriding state interest. And what is that overriding state interest? Is it because of national security? Certainly not, because the Chinese are already involved in NGCP. And if we're going to argue that the distribution of electricity is vested with national interest considerations, where is the threat? The Chinese were allowed to enter the NGCP for quite a number of years already, and there is no proven threat to national security. So even if they invoke a threat to national security as the overriding interest, then how do you explain the fact that the Chinese are already in NGCP and there has not been any threat to the national interest? Okay? But on the basis of the nationality test or the nationality test, no, I would even say that it is patently unconstitutional. Now, beyond the considerations on equal protection, on the equal protection clause, there are bigger interests that we should be discussing. The first of which, of course, is that we're amending the law because we want to modernize the economic provisions of our Constitution. No? Now, I don't have any strong provisions on this, but I do acknowledge that the Constitution is a living instrument which must be amended, no? Pursuant to the changing times. Certainly, the distinction between the 87 Constitution and the existing times is that it was enacted prior to the WTO regime. Under the WTO regime, not only is there liberalization in trade, there is also liberalization in investments as well as in investments as well as in services. No, so we could say, pursuant to the decision of Tanyada versus Angara, where the Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of the WTO, despite the fact that there is a Filipino first policy in the Constitution, that when the country ratified the WTO, calling for liberalization in both investment as well as in services, it is because of a greater national interest. And therefore, I would say that any attempt now to modify the Constitution, the economic provisions of the Constitution, must be because of a general, bigger national interest pursuant to the decision in Angara versus Tanyada. Secondly, we are facing a pandemic and we are looking forward to a post-pandemic recovery. And certainly, crucial to this post-pandemic recovery would be job creation, entrepreneurship, and innovation. So why are we now limiting job creation by discriminating against state-owned enterprises? Let me highlight that Philippine development, in order to achieve ultimate Philippine development, we need to work with all partners, local and foreign, who can help us with technologies and resources that we don't have in the first place. Had we had these technologies and the capital, then there would be no need for foreign intervention, but the reality is we simply do not have it. For instance, the exploitation of mineral deposits in Rectobank. If we had the capital as well as the technical know-how to extract the mineral deposit from Rectobank, we would have done so a long time ago. The reality is we don't, and that is why the government enters into service contracts, in fact, which, according again to the Supreme Court, is not covered by the 60-40 rule. And I have also consulted, of course, with hundreds of businessmen and business groups, and the reality is competition, particularly foreign competition, is always welcome because ultimately, I'm sorry, my video apparently was turned off. Ultimately, it is the Filipino consumers that will benefit from foreign competition. I think I have said too much. I hope my discussion was not too technical, but my discussion is on the basis of jurisprudence, particularly on the Equal Protection Clause, as well as on the reality that as a living institution, as a living instrument, the Constitution has to be amended pursuant to the changing times. Thank you very much, Wilson. And my apologies for not acknowledging the president of the Filipino-Chinese Chambers of Commerce, Dr. Henry Lim, as well as all the other guests today. May you have a good day.
Thank you very much to the very eloquent, thought-provoking analysis by former presidential spokesperson and former legislator and foremost, I think, one of the foremost constitutional and legal experts in the Philippines today. Thank you very much, Secretary Harry Roque, for a crash course on law, constitutional law, foreign investments, even WTO and other issues. Thank you very much. Ako din, na-enlighten ako. Next, we'd like to invite for the opening statement of our other speaker. He is Dr. Henry Lim Bonlyong, business leader, industrialist, philanthropist, pioneer of Philippine hybrid rice technology to uplift the Filipino rice farmers. He is president of Federation of Filipino-Chinese Chambers of Commerce and Industry, Inc., FFCCCII. He is also convener of the Filipino-Chinese Community Calamity Fund, coalition of 11 civic and business groups raising almost 100 million pesos already for Typhoon Odette relief in the past few weeks. And also, Dr. Henry Lim Bonlyong is CEO of Sterling Paper Group, founder of SL Agritech, educated in University of the Philippines, Diliman Engineering, and also Harvard Business School. Welcome for his opening statement, Dr. Henry Lim Bonlyong.
Thank you so much, my my good friend, of course, my chairman in the media committee of the Federation, Wilson Flores. I'm sorry I came in quite a little bit late, but then I think I'm still on time. Of course, to my very good friend, former presidential spokesman, Harry Roque, former Agriculture Undersecretary Tetchi Capella, whom I've not seen for a very, very long time. Mr. Lavina, President of Asian Center for Comparative Governance. George C., my chairman of the board member of the Federation Trade and Industry Committee and also the chairman of Unbill Business Club. Of course, Wilson Flores, also another board member. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is, of course, the vision of our organization, the Federation of the Filipino-Chinese Chamber of Commerce and Industry Incorporated, to achieve economic prosperity for our country and fellow Filipinos through sustainable growth, particularly now amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. In this view, we have supported the economic reform agenda of the government to make the Philippines more globally competitive and promote ease of doing business here. To attract more foreign investment, we support the passage of the proposed amendment, the Public Service Act, which establishes a rate-setting mechanism that will result in the fair and reasonable price, the commodity or service, improved technology, and modernized service. It's likewise updated the penalties for those who violate laws and regulations to the detriment of consumers. The passage of this legislation will stimulate the provision of better services, the lifting of the restrictions on ownership, the operation of public services in the country. Eventually, the better services will cascade to other parts of the economy, since these are necessary for businesses to thrive, improve access, and lower rates translate to a more conducive environment doing business in the country. Furthermore, the entry of foreign investors will translate to more jobs, which is what we need to help our fellow Filipinos recover from the pandemic. The influx of foreign direct investment for the FDIs has been on the upswing, and we believe that this legislation will be crucial to sustaining and further improving this favorable trend. All of Asia's most progressive economic success stories, from Singapore, Hong Kong to South Korea to China, Thailand, Malaysia to Vietnam, flourish with welcoming globally competitive foreign investment policies. In stark contrast, countries which were belligerent, protectionist, and anti-foreign investments in policies largely behind economically and technologically. Look at Macau. When the Portuguese colonizers left and returned this city to China, the Chinese communist leaders recognized the importance of globalization, of competition, and foreign investment. They broke up the casino monopoly, invited international foreign investors, and Macau prospered as never before. The amendments to PSA will help the Philippines attain or even surpass the levels of foreign investments received by our neighbors. The ASEAN Investment Report 2020 to 2021 of the ASEAN Secretariat and the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development cited that the FDI inflows into ASEAN reached its highest entry level in 2019 at $182 billion, making ASEAN the largest recipient of FDI in the developing world. Due to the unprecedented impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, the FDI inflows into ASEAN decreased to US $137 billion, from $182 billion to $137 billion in 2020. But compared to the decline of global FDI levels, ASEAN still performs slightly better. Investment within ASEAN remained resilient, increasing by 5% to 23 billion in 2020. Then again in November 2020, Asean and its 5 free trade agreement partners, Australia, China, Japan, South Korea, and New Zealand, signed the Regional Comprehensive and Economic Partnership, or Rcep, agreement, which will increase the inter-regional trade. And all of these present bright prospects and are expected to provide opportunities to ASEAN. Of course, for the Philippines and its partners, of course, the forwarder also boosts investment and enhance the development of business activities in this region. Presently, our other ASEAN neighbors have a bigger share of FDIs, but competition teaches us not to be complacent. As such, we call on our lawmakers to review and revise outdated laws in order to adapt to present day's realities. The amendment to the Public Service Act, which is part of President Duterte's legislative priorities, will make our foreign investment policies at par with our neighbors. We hope that the approval of this bill in the House and Senate will pave the way for its enactment into law. Again, thank you and a pleasant good morning to everybody.
Thank you very much, Dr. Henry Limbon Yon, President of FFCCCII, for your very interesting and very progressive ideas about foreign investments and Philippine economic recovery. Later on, all our speakers will answer questions from the media and from the audience also via Zoom. Next, we'd like to invite, next speaker is Mr. George C., Wharton-educated industrialist, financier, international trade negotiator for the Philippines. Also, formerly with the garment industry as chairman of Confederation of Garment Exporters, chairman emeritus of Anvil Business Club. Also, now director of think tank called Integrated Development Studies Institute, IDSI, for his opening statement about foreign investments and the impact on the Philippine economy and our future. Mr. George C.
Thank you, Wilson, for this invitation again. Our friend, spokesman Harry Roque, Federation President, my President Henry, Pete Lavina, Anna, Tetchi. Just to start, for foreign investment restrictiveness, we are currently ranked as the 3rd most restrictive of 83 countries. No? The Lee Kuan Yew in the 1990s predicted that we would fall behind Malaysia and Thailand. This was when he came to the Philippines to speak speak to the Filipinos. He encouraged us to open up to competition and join the ranks. Today, after 30 years, our per capita GDP is half of that of Thailand. We are a third of that of Malaysia, and we've fallen behind Indonesia and Vietnam. We can see also, since Megawide joined the forces with Indian foreign groups, our airports, from being considered the worst in the world, has won international awards and got built on time. And we also had more than double the tourists in Cebu, among other things. Since National Grid took over, the brownouts became a thing of the past. And since we took over from the Japanese our maintenance of the rails, we had 5 or more breakdowns a day for a number of years. Malaysian capital helped build our early elevated highway successes. We lost the petrochemical plant, $500 million some 30 years ago in Bataan because the congressman there would not allow it to be moved to Batangas. Li Ka-shing won the Subic port twice, which again, also about 30 years ago, wherein he promised that he would bring a third or so of the volume of Hong Kong directly to the Philippines. And he won it twice and lost it twice because of foreign ownership, supposedly, even though it was approved initially. And so we lost bringing in that volume 30 years ago. It is not really foreign direct investments we are after, but the positive effects, which requires some added factors we would like to say, but is frequently not discussed by pundits or think tanks. No, these we are referring to culture, competence in math and language, and working smart. Because without these, even with the foreign direct investments, what will happen is just we would lose control of our industries. No, of course we need faster logistics, seaports, airports, digital infrastructure, but as much for manufacturing and being a processing hub and not just for consumption. Without this, we cannot protect against foreign preponderance in the markets. We have to realize, of course, that many foreign investments and influence are already here. We have to consider how are we going to go through the process, and we have to understand in any case that these laws and implementations are evolving. We cannot be too fixed, no? And things change. So our telcos are capitalized by Indonesians and Singaporean government state-owned enterprises. National Grid by the Chinese. Our media content and advertising is now controlled by the US through Netflix, Facebook, gaming, and the predominant use of our people's time at over 9 hours a day. But that is all right because these things helped us move to the middle income GDP, which was started, in fairness, by liberalizations under President Ramos as well. No, a lot of the major moves were done at that time. No, but so what we're saying that these public service amendments and foreign investment laws should be amended, but they should also be consistent and non-discriminatory. And we should recognize that they can change over time. They are not fixed. We need to adjust it to new technologies, cultures, and definitions of security. For instance, telcos are no longer as important as broadband access. Media has reduced roles for TV and publications. We have actually lost control of our medias. Services have been outstripping manufacturing in many countries. So the formulation, we note that the formulators of this act, these amendments, have taken flexibility into account. So what we need to see is not just this law. We have to look at how we are going to execute it, and we need to have a culture of bringing together talent pools in our search for technocrats to enter government and create the right incentives. So the law on allowing the investments alone will not work. We have to get into this work together and reduce our concentration on politics to allow new capital and technology inflows from abroad to build our new markets for us, our new capacities, and accelerate our recovery, and a chance to prepare for the next fourth stage of industrial revolution. We have already lost the previous stage. Let us go leapfrog into the fourth stage. Meanwhile, I would like to share with you an image from the past, one of the fathers of ASEAN progress, Lee Kuan Yew's advice to the Philippines. Now, if we could play a 2-minute video, please.
Now, the experience of Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia is
It's not
especially
showing.
relevant.
It's not showing.
From the 1950s to the 1970s, their policies were like those of the Philippines. They protected their markets to establish import substituting industries. Their products were poor and growth was slow because these were monopolies with no competition. But by the early 1980s, just about 10 years ago, first Thailand and next Malaysia changed policies. They learned from the policies of the NIEs. They watched Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, where foreign investments and export-oriented growth made for booming growth. Thailand and Malaysia started to deregulate and to liberalize. They allowed 100% direct foreign investments. They cut down protection and opened up their industries and services to competition. Through the infusion of technology and high-quality management from successful countries like Japan, the NIEs, America, and Europe, their goods and services became internationally competitive. These two countries had their economic growth bouncing up from 3 to 4% a year to 8 to 10% per annum. Few years after that, Indonesia, watching what had happened in Thailand and Malaysia, also changed course. They are now pressing ahead with deregulation and liberalization to open up the economy and make their products internationally competitive. Our foreign investors would not have gone into Thailand, Malaysia, or Indonesia if they had not got their macroeconomic policies right. Second, concentrate on economics, not politics. Or more accurately, stop the politicking. Lift restrictions on trade and investment, dismantle the web of measures which keep out foreign companies and make Philippine companies compete to survive, not thrive at the expense of the ordinary Filipino. Third, build up your infrastructure like power stations, roads, communications, either in partnership with or completely through the private sector if you don't have the funds. In conclusion, I hope I have provoked you. Businessmen, the government, the establishment, the press and TV of the Philippines. Provoked you into setting your priorities for getting your act together so that you can achieve your potential. If you maximize the next 6 years of the Ramos administration by freeing your economy, attracting and getting the investments, and making them profitable, and if you work hard at creating conditions that make them increasingly profitable, then you will get yourselves back into the mainstream of growth and development and be in the same league as Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia. The OECD countries, the OECD calls them now the new dynamic economies of Asia. You can be and should be one of them. Thank you.
That was exactly 30 years ago. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mr. George C., for your interesting talk about foreign investments and for sharing this interesting, thought-provoking, up to now, video of what the late Singapore statesman just said. What he just said essentially summarized what our speakers today said. Thank you to Secretary Harry Roque, Dr. Henry Limbonyong, and George C. Now we move on to the reactions, and then we'll go to the question and answer. For the reaction, we'd like to first invite Ms. Tetchi Capella. She is leader in the solar industry, alternative energy sector of the Philippines. In the year 2006, this lady helped use solar energy to light up 10,000 homes in remote rural areas all over the Philippines. Ms. Tetchi Cruz Capella studied at Maryknoll College, completed her master's in international development at Harvard University. She became, in the 1990s, the youngest and first woman to serve as Assistant Secretary of the Department of Agriculture. Later on, she went into the energy sector, helped pioneer Philippine Solar and Power Alliance, a non-profit for industry to help the renewable energy law in this country. She also, in 2013, launched her own solar company called Sun Asia Energy Inc. responsible for developing the third biggest power plant in the Philippines. She received various awards, including the Most Outstanding Scientist Award in Singapore in 2016. Among her many other credentials, I'll just choose a few. She is today working for Philippine Renewable Energy as CEO of Sun Asia Energy, and she is chairman of the Philippine Solar and Storage Energy Alliance. Let us welcome Ms. Tetchi Cruz Capellan for her reaction to the speakers.
Thank you very much, Wilson, for that very generous introduction. I think our distinguished speakers gave us excellent arguments already on the effects, on the possible effects of this continued restriction in our investment climate. The policy imperative and the arguments that they have made are very compelling, and it is urgent. What I'd like to add as my reaction to the speakers are on the micro level, specifically focusing on what we are missing in the renewable energy sector. And with that, I would just, can I share my slide? Can I have access to the share screen? Can you see it? Do I have access to a shared screen, or Anna?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, thank you very much
The
for that.
green investments, thank you.
Okay, so this is what I'd like to focus on, specifically on what we may be missing. The whole world has already focused on transforming into a green economy. And if you will note, most of the transition, the digital transition, has already happened in other sectors, but the energy sector has been kept in the dark. Let me be very specific on that. The transportation sector has gone digital. And that is the reason why we have Uber, we have Transportify, we have Lalamove. And that is within the power of our fingertips. The same is true for the banking sector. We have GCash, we have internet that we can transact with. That is in the banking sector. That is also true in the retail business. And therefore, that's the reason why we have survived during the pandemic, because of that access. But the energy sector has been left behind. And we still continue to have brownouts in some parts of our country. There are still a number of communities that remain unelectrified. And our transmission infrastructure and our distribution infrastructure cannot keep up to the pace of development or the growth of our economy. And we are missing a lot in this aspect, and that is the reason why I'd like to focus on the green investment. So next slide, please. Is that okay? This is the present environment climate. This is the present investment climate in the Philippines. Under the Arroyo government, a lot of the Renewable Energy Act was enacted. And I think what is important to note is from 2008 up to 2015, we have moved our renewable energy program from, I'm talking about solar, from a 2 gigawatt capacity to from a 2 megawatt capacity to a 1 gigawatt capacity. This may be technical, but I think you just focus on the numbers. We started from a 2 megawatt, and we are now at a 1,000 megawatt. That seems big, but not really, because what is important is that in the law, there is a renewable portfolio standard. And this is going to happen in the next 10 years, starting in 2022. In a nutshell, it just requires all those who are distributing power, such as Meralco, such as DECO, and those who are also generators of power, to source 1% of their energy from renewable. This is part of the commitment of our government to the global arena through the COP26. So this is our answer to that. Let us look at the numbers. From an energy output point of view, what is going to happen if this is implemented is that from a 22 terawatt hours, we will have to increase the renewable share to 62. So from 21% of renewable, our share will be 35. Why 35? What is that magic number of 35? Bear in mind that when we inherited the government, when Cory Aquino took over in 1986, we had a very big share of our renewable. Two reasons. One, a lot of the hydropower plants were put in place during his time. And secondly, also, we had a lot of geo plant that is the Tiwi-Tiwi, that is the Palipinyon. So we had a very big share of the renewables. And then this was further expanded during the time of Ramos. There were a lot of hydropower plants during the brownouts that were established. Okay, so the objective was to return to that 35%. So that is not just a number, it is a number that the Philippines used to enjoy, used to have. So it is reachable. It is possible that we can achieve this, get 35%. Now, everybody is predicting that this is going to be driven by solar. Why? Because there are not enough water, not like during the time of Ramos and Marcos, where there's still a lot of rivers. There are already multiple uses of water, so the hydroelectric energy may not really contribute to that 35%. There are not enough, basically, steam that can be harnessed, although there are still some. There's got to be some investment there so that we can harness our volcanoes and turn them into energy. But essentially, it has been projected that this will be a solar-driven growth in the renewable sector. Now, what does that imply insofar as returns? If we are true to the predictions, 15 gigawatt capacity is possible under this rule. The renewable portfolio standard in the next 10 years, if we go by 1% growth, this can mean a new capacity of 15 gigawatt. Now, the expected investment in this is about 3.8 trillion US dollars. If we are going to allow this, then it is going to be a $3.8 trillion. In terms of employment, this will generate about 45,000 green jobs, or in terms of value, this will generate about 13.5 billion yearly in terms of salaries. That is the volume of consumption that is going to circulate additionally into the economy. Now, in terms of local taxes, it is projected that that is going to yield about 840 trillion pesos. Okay. In tourism, I think, the interest in windmill and in solar. So there are a lot of tourism that is increased, and using the data of the Department of Tourism, we expect about 150 million pesos of additional tourist spending in this with the installation of renewable energy. And in the environment sector, we can more or less expect to avoid 15 million metric tons. That is equivalent, according to the Asian Development Bank, of 414 million US dollars annually. In terms of energy, in the last years, there were no new power plants that have been built. And this is the reason why NGCP has always issued alerts. Thanks, we have not had brownouts, but we are close to that. We are on alert. So I think the introduction of a 40 terawatt hour of electricity is something that is going to give us more stability into the grid, more power reliability, and an avoided cost of 8,000 pesos per megawatt hour. There of energy supply, prices at the wholesale electricity market rises to as much as 8,000 pesos per megawatt hour. So all of these are addressed if we allow investments to come in. Now, what is the relationship of the Public Service Act here? Unfortunately, the glass is half full, because what it only allows is the transmission and then the distribution aspect. It doesn't mention anything on power generation, which means our generation will continue to be restricted to foreign to Filipino. The top 5 supplier of solar panels in the whole world is no longer Europeans or Americans. They are Chinese. And this by no less than Bloomberg. So that is the total number of the 5 top solar manufacturers. They have now transformed into investment entities, meaning they are no longer, they're moving towards producing solar panels into investing. So you have there a very huge source of capital, and this is what is predicted in the next in the next 10 years, the coming years. Most of the investors will go to renewables, and much money will be available for investments into renewable energy. This uh, the, there are still and gave it to the society as part of our post-pandemic recovery. So I think the Public Service Act is a good step forward. It is half full, as I will say, because there are still restrictions, and that is inclusion of the generation aspect and also power generation part of the electricity supply chain or the energy ecosystem, and also the restriction on Chinese state-owned companies who have enormous amount of capital that can be deployed in the Philippines to reach our goal of 35% and 15 gigawatt hours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the very enlightening reaction and explanation of Ms. Tetchi Cruz Capellan. Very enlightening talaga about solar power, the importance of foreign direct investments to the expansion of our energy sources and the Public Services Act. Next, we'd like to invite for final reaction, then we are going to the question and answer portion now. Mr. Peter Lavina is a respected leader from Davao City, Mindanao, chairman of the Philippines-China Mutual Cooperation Society, and Deputy Secretary General of the Association for Philippines-China Understanding, or APCU. There are many others, but we'll just limit to this. Mr. Peter Lavina, we'll invite him for his reaction. Thank you for joining us. Are you in Davao or Metro Manila, Mr. Lavina? Is he connected? Welcome to Mr. Peter.
Thank you.
Lavina,
Thank
yes,
you,
welcome.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Wilson. Thank you to the Federation and the 3 other groups that are helping us here. APCU, of course, IDSI, and BRICS Philippines. I call the 4 of you as the uni team of promoting Philippine-China understanding. Thank you for this Pandesal Forum. Thank you to our speakers, Senator Harry, Chairman Henry, Chairman George, and of course, Tetchi. We have 3 reactions in behalf of the Philippines-China Mutual Cooperation Society. First of all, as already pointed out, we have one of the most restrictive investment policies in our region. That is why we are lagging behind our neighbors. And when we decided to open up, we should open up to everyone. We should not restrict, discriminate, or exclude, as already pointed out by our speakers. Second, we are concerned about the prevailing xenophobia. Very clearly, it targets China companies, no, especially China state-owned companies. We should not legislate xenophobia. We are in fact campaigning against racism and against anti-China policies, and we should be watchful of these inserted provisions in our laws. Thirdly, there are also concerns about national security. Again, this is very restrictive. We have already experienced this regime of so-called national security. I'm very thankful to George for bringing out Minister Lee Kuan Yew again, who 30 years ago has already warned us, focus on economics, not on politics, because all these restrictive provisions are being inserted by members of our Congress and Senate who are merely politicking. No, they want puggy points, but they do not know the implications of their proposals. So we should be watchful of these things. Lastly, Wilson,
Yes.
everyone is correct. This is a very important and urgent issue. The three amendments that has been passed already in Congress and lately in the Senate are all meant to help attract foreign investment in the Philippines. But before this becomes a law to be signed by President Duterte, we should clarify in the bicameral committee what these restrictive provisions that being inserted into the provisions of our Public Services Act, our Investment Act, and our Trade Liberalization Act. Hopefully, members of Congress can go over these provisions, and let's open up to everyone so that the Philippines will benefit in the same manner that our neighbors have benefited from all the foreign investment that have come into their countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the very excellent and interesting analysis by Mr. Peter Lavina, summarizing in essence what our speakers had spoken earlier. I like what you just said. We should not legislate xenophobia. We should not be anti-foreign investment, and we have lagged behind even our socialist neighbor Vietnam. Thank you very much, Mr. Pete Lavina, for your very enlightening reaction. We go now to the question and answer by media and the audience. The first question I'd like to raise here is from Mr. Warren de Guzman of ABS-CBN. His question is also the same as the question of Mr. Joseph Alano and three other people asking the same question essentially. Ang sabi ni Mr. Warren de Guzman of ABS-CBN, would the panel say that this Senate amendment is targeting Tito Telecom? Do you have any comments about this? Anybody want to comment about this question from Mr. Warren de Guzman of ABS-CBN? Do you think this Senate amendment is targeting Tito Telecom? Even our reactors could react, could reply.
Maybe the considerations they put in principle sounds like there's a sound reasoning behind it, but then the timing and the way that they have circumscribed the conditions, it looks like it might be said to be targeting Chinese investments. But on the other hand, they might forget that Globe Telecom is being invested in majorly by Singapore Telecom, which the government is a major investor in. Aside from other aspects, no, in terms of our media, although the television licenses are not with foreign companies, but they were with foreign citizens. It was already proven, it was already discussed in public. That's being owned by foreign citizens, as well as the running of our PLDT and so on. So there are many. If they are going to make a law that is good for the Filipinos, then let us make it consistent. Because in terms of money, I don't think that China or many of these countries are doing it necessarily for money, because the entire Philippine economy is less than half of 1 year's growth for China. No? And so if we are talking about security, the control of Facebook already knows all the Facebook, and YouTube knows all the habits of all our military people, all our movements, all our communications. They know everything we do, and they have control of our advertising. No? And furthermore, the control, having EDGA here, is having the US bases in a place that we cannot control, which our president cannot visit, and we cannot control the contents of. So if they're talking about security, then let's look at overall security. In any case, we're not here to talk about politics, as suggested by the ex-Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew. Let's look at what is best for the Philippines. What infrastructure do we need to build, and what foreign investments do we need? Which ones will bring in technology? But things like roads and bridges, actually, if it is clearly needed, we don't really need foreign investments there. We just need the contractor. But if there's a major project that we cannot afford or we don't want to take the loans for, there's no point doing a $200-300 million road. Even I can do it for free for the government, because there's a sovereign guarantee for these. If there's a sovereign guarantee. Now, if it is a major infrastructure that is a gamble, then maybe we want foreign investments there. So we need to define it in a way that's flexible over time and over circumstances, and we have to be able to make use of it.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the next question, Mr. Warren de Guzman. Thank you for that answer, Mr. George C. The other question, Mr. Warren de Guzman, for Dr. Henry Lim Bondyong and Mr. George C. If you know of any investors ready to enter the Philippines now, and that the amendment to the Retail Trade Liberalization Act has been passed, waiting for this, how much is the projected investments that may come in? Do you know of any investors who are just waiting for the PSA to be passed also before entering? Do you have any anecdotes or actual cases of investors just waiting for Philippine amendments to the laws? Quick answers lang, kasi we have a lot of questions here to everyone. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Wilson.
Dr. Henry Lim. Yes.
After the previous questions regarding dito, it
Yes.
seems that there might be some sort, we think that they are trying to prevent the Chinese government from investing in dito. I'm sure there might be something there regarding that one, regarding the xenophobia and all these things. But of course, just as George has said, Globe Telecom is also invested by Singtel. And we should also remember, even in China, most of the Chinese big companies are also foreignly invested also. Just like Alibaba, in which I think SoftBank has a big say in Alibaba. And there are also a lot of other tech companies in China that are also foreignly invested. Because these companies, during the early years, nobody would like to invest on them, except only for the foreigners. So China is allowing that. Then why are not we allowing? Of course, this is my answer, and hopefully we can see that we should really try to amend the law and have more FDI as much as possible.
Thank you very much, Dr. Henry Lim Bondyong. And thank you to Warren Guzman. Yes,
Wilson,
can you yes,
can I comment on that?
Ms. Tetchi, yes.
Yeah. In so far as the retail liberalization, I think that is something that is good, but it came late because right now, with Shopee and with Lazada dominating us, the trade liberalization, the retail trade liberalization came
Too late.
Too late.
Yeah.
Technology has overtaken us, and we have, in fact, a lot of, as the pandemic has now shown, a lot of the rentals are suffering because
Yes.
of the because of that. No, so I think what is important is to look at, as what has also the other speakers have said, focus on the key infrastructure where we will need major deployment of capital and investments. And that is the reason why I'm arguing that the energy entire supply chain should be open up: generation, transmission, and distribution. Because if we grow at 5% annually or even higher than that, then you need power. You really need power to to move for mobility and for your manufacturing and other services.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tetchi Capella, for your very interesting answer. We've been left behind in certain industries already. We should not, in this case now. Thank you. Next question we have here for Secretary Harry Roque. Somebody asked us here, how are the laws of the Philippines?
Son, sorry, I think
Yes.
being hacked because there's some chat very and I talked to them. They are not the ones commenting this, so we will turn off the chat and they have to send the questions directly to you.
Yes. Please text
Josh, can you please turn off the chat? There's something happening.
Yes. Thank you.
Talks to Wilson directly. We will send the number of Wilson.
Yes, we have. Thank you very much to everyone.
Turn off the chat.
Yes. The question for Secretary Harry Roque, how are Philippine foreign investment laws and policies compared to our ASEAN neighbors and competitors? How are our is Secretary Harry Roque there? Or maybe Dr. Lim, or maybe Dr. Lim and George C. could answer. Anyone among our, yes. How are we compared to our ASEAN neighbors in terms of foreign investment laws and policies?
Actually, we are lagging behind them now. So even compared to Vietnam, there are a lot of Chinese companies that are already in Vietnam, and considering that Vietnam and China used to have conflicts also in the South China Sea. But because of their investment law, businessmen will only go to a certain place now where they are really being welcome. We hope that by passing our laws, we can have lots of foreign investment. Regarding also the Retail Liberalization Act, this was actually this came out in the early 50s now, in which one of our presidents, because they would like to protect the sari-sari store from Chinese competition. So they really do a nationalization of the retail app. And that's what drives the local Chinese from opening up sari-sari stores to going into manufacturing. And, sometimes it's also a blessing in disguise for us. But then right now, we're not talking about sari-sari stores anymore. We're talking about chain of stores like 7-Eleven. We're also talking about big shopping malls like SM, Rustan's, Robinsons, and we are talking about big, these online stores like Shopee and Lazada. So things really have changed, and it will be too late for us now to upgrade our laws, and hopefully, we should do it sooner than later. Otherwise, we regret the rest of our lives.
Thank you very much, Dr. Henry Lim Bon Leong, for your insights. Another question is,
Give a little comparative.
yes. Another question here about restricting foreign investment and trade. Somebody asked here, because Dr. Lim, you mentioned earlier RCEP, the importance of RCEP. This is not exactly with our topic, but related also to economic recovery. and legislation, what is the status of RCEP ratification in the Philippines? And are you in favor of faster ratification of this so the Philippines will not lag behind our neighbors again?
Sorry, Wilson, for interrupting again. We're going to remove people who don't have a name or affiliation on their profile because we're getting almost 10, 20 people adding and they're sending in spam. I think, Wilson, your Pandesal forum is getting too famous.
Yes. Thank you.
Send your number again for the questions. Please directly text Wilson's your questions.
Yes.
We're turning off the chat box, and we're going to remove people who do not have a full name on their profile. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's go again to the anybody who wants to answer about RCEP. Kahit na brief lang brief answer because we have limited time. We are about to end the session. Can someone comment on RCEP, its importance, and when should it be ratified in the Philippines?
Well, I think Western RCEP is very important. It has become one of the largest, trade agreement over the world, and with China leading this Rcep. And of course, we are also looking if India will join us also in the future, then it's going to be really something that will be very, very, very big. And I think the sooner that we ratify the laws in order for Rcep to be fully implemented, it will be better. So we are looking forward to this one. Our economic growth that I forecasted 6.5% to 7.5% for this year still remains. Of course, the Omicron virus has put a dampened effect on this one, but as I see and I feel the pulse of our members organizations, I think as long as it doesn't go beyond the first quarter, we can still achieve a respectable 6.5%. But if it goes beyond the first quarter, then maybe our prediction. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lim. So you are still bullish in general about Philippine economic recovery and growth. Especially, I think, Dr. Lim, you said earlier that with the passage of this liberalization of foreign investments policy, it will accelerate Philippine recovery. What about other speakers and reactors? Can you react about Philippine economic recovery this year and the impact of foreign investments, hopefully, on our economic recovery despite Omicron?
Wilson, can I?
Yes, Mr. Pete Lavina.
Yes. First of all, why is the Senate delaying the Rcep ratification?
Yes.
I guess it suffered the same politicking, the strong anti-China sentiments within some of our members of the Senate is delaying this ratification. In the same manner that all these restrictive provisions have been inserted in the amendments of the Public Services Act. So we should be watchful also of these tendencies. China has been very helpful in our combat against COVID-19. And China will be very helpful in our economic recovery. We should fight against these racist tendencies among our policymakers.
Thank you very much for your very good insight, Mr. Pete Lavina, especially about RCEP and the wrong mindsets of some politicians. Thank you, Mr. Pete Lavina. We have time for maybe one last question for everyone. I think closing statement na, I've been signaled here that we don't have time na for all. Thank you very much, all the speakers and the actors. We have to invite now for a closing remark one of the prime movers of this Pandesal Forum today. He's an intellectual and nationalist, TV radio host, and president of PHIL-BRICS Strategic Studies, Mr. Herman Camentong Laurel. for his closing remarks, and then later on we'll invite all the speakers for your closing statements. Mr. Herman Camentong Laurel. Thank you for being prime mover of this Pandesal Forum on this important, urgent topic. Mr. Herman Laurel, President of Philippine BRICS Strategic Studies.
Okay, I'm trying to unmute.
Yes, we could hear you.
And
Yes.
my camera is now on, I think. Yes, magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat, sa ating lahat. At maraming salamat po. Thank you sa mga participants natin, in particular our guests who took time out to join us. Hopefully, Senator to-be Harry Roque will be helpful in directing our legislation in the future towards really progressive and pro-people policies. Thank you, Mr. Henry D. Bunlyong of the FFCCCII, George C. of IDSI, Tetchi Capella, who was an eye-opener in the insights into the power sector. Peter Q. Lavina, of course, was the one who initiated this webinar of ours. And who else have I missed out? Yeah, if I miss out anybody, I'm sorry. But I'd also like to credit the people behind the scenes, Joshua, Madam Anna of APCU and Philippine BRICS Strategic Studies, Austin of IDSI, Clarissa and Aya of Pandesal Forum, and to everybody, especially the media who have joined us and raised very thoughtful questions. There are still many details that we should expand on as we go along, but we will always be meeting with roadblocks politically if we do not have more progressive senators and congressmen to open the way to real progressive policies and directions. I think we were left behind in the 80s for various reasons, including being too protective. But that's one of the points I want to make. We are good at protecting, but we are not good at supporting industry, supporting agricultural sector, supporting various economic enterprises of ours. So there's that imbalance that has confused our policy directions. So we've already taken an hour and a half of everybody's time, but thank you very much. And this will not be, of course, the last. This is going to be the first of many more discussions to come with the cooperation of IDSI, Pandesal Forum, FFCCCCI, and other people's institutions. With that, I thank again everybody, including our media friends and individuals who have joined us. The success of our efforts, many webinars and media forum with IDSI and the other groups that we are working with is showing because saboteurs are now taking interest in us. So thank you very much. Wilson, back to you.
Thank you very much again, Mr. Herman Camentong Laurel, very eloquent and nationalist intellectual, President of Philippine BRICS Strategic Studies. Next, we'd like to request all the speakers to give their closing statement. Is Secretary Roque there? I know he was on the road a while ago in the car. Is Secretary Roque there for the closing statement? Wala muna. Let's invite Dr. Henry Limbon Leong, President of FFCCCII, also philanthropist who is convener of the Filipino-Chinese Community Calamity Fund. Dr. Henry Limbon Leong, for your closing statement to summarize what you've just said this morning.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Wilson. This regarding, of course, foreign direct investment. This also regarding opening up the Philippine economy, to more foreigners. As a businessman, as part, as a president of the federation, there's really this ambivalent feeling. If we open up foreign investment, there will be more competition. Personally, if you think that these people are coming here to compete with us, or this is a sense of dangers and whatever. But then again, if there's no competition, then we'll be complacent. Just like what our company, one of our companies, trust regarding competition is that we really eat competition for breakfast. We pray for the survivors and for competitors, so that one day we can show our superiority. And this, I think, should be the mindset of companies, that we should welcome competition. But then again, our politicians are the one crafting the law, and we hope that what Lee Kuan Yew said 30 years ago should finally, be impressed upon them, so that we will not regret after another 30 years. Hopefully, we will be facing this pandemic altogether, and hopefully that we can really outgrow this pandemic, and we can come out also with one to be one of the shiniest stars among the ASEAN nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Henry Limbon Liong, for your closing statement. Next, we'd like to invite Mr. George C. of IDSI for his closing statement. Mr. George C., for your closing statement about what you've just said this morning, a summary.
Wilson, he was getting connected and disconnected.
Okay lang. Maybe later on when he's back, we'll call him again. We'll ask now Ms. Tetchi Capellan for her closing statement.
Thank you, Wilson. In closing, I would just like to reaffirm, I agree with my longtime and very good friend, Dr. Lim, for his forecast in terms of the growth. I think our resilience in this pandemic has been excellent. And I think we will see growth in the coming years. But we need really a path to recovery, a clear roadmap to recovery. And I believe that knowing what Henry has, because he has the pulse of business, and what we can only do, as I have already stated in my reaction statement, is to support business by ensuring that power and electricity continue to be available and reliable and competitive for our business to thrive, both small scale and big business. Because without power, we will not be able to reach our goal. We have seen the brownouts that has happened in the late 80s. We do not want that. You do not want an interrupted power, while you're growing at very high speed. The energy sector has to catch up. And the only way that big ticket infrastructure on power can happen is through foreign investment. We have to open our doors to foreign investment, so that capital can be deployed in not only in the transmission and in the distribution stage of the energy ecosystem, but more so in the generation. Because what is there to transmit or distribute if you do not have power that you will generate? So I think that's my final closing statement.
Thank you very much again for your interesting and very thought-provoking closing statement, because you are reminding us to take care of our power sector for sustainable economic growth and recovery. That's a very, very good reminder to all of us, and wake-up call. Foreign direct investments key to better power development and progress. Last but not the least, we'd like to invite the very dynamic leader, civic leader of Davao City, Mr. Peter Lavina, for his closing statement.
Thank you, Wilson. Thank you, everyone. I think we should not lose sight of the next step, very important, to prevent this discriminatory provision from becoming into law. So we should lobby the bicameral committee as well as the president not to sign these proposed amendments until it is clarified. Wilson, in our efforts to open up the economy and invite investors, I think we should utilize everything, government to government, business to business, people to people. We should not discriminate whether they are state-owned companies or private companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much again to the dynamic and eloquent Mr. Peter Lavina, who people might forget was instrumental in helping President Duterte win the election 6 years ago. I remember you were helping. And also regards to your very talented wife in the Department of Agriculture, very talented Usec Lavina. So thank you to everyone, and thank you for everybody attending today's unique Pandesal Forum.
So sorry, I just connected again.
George. Yes, we have a closing statement from Mr. George C. of IDSI.
Well, thank you, Wilson. We'd like to thank you and all the organizers and media and our friends from the universities and the other agencies. Your role is, of course, we know that this role is very, very important. Just matter for the legislators. Aside from opening up foreign investments, we do all have to do our part to set our people in the right direction of what they should do, because we also need to match the talents and the investments. As currently we know, the inquiries from Japan and Europe are quite active currently. We are not the #1 choice, but we are now being considered, partly also because of the infrastructure improvements that have happened in logistics, and to be considered again as one of the possibilities for investments, and we have to do our part as well. Thank you everyone for joining, and yeah, let's look forward. The opportunities are very great, and they coming now in different sectors from what we were used to before. We have to look at areas and adapt. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. George C. And again, to all our speakers, thank you to Secretary Harry Roque. Thank you to Dr. Henry Limbonyong, Mr. George C., Mr. Pete Lavina, Ms. Tetchi Capellan, and to all our media friends and to all our guests who's attended today's unique Pandesal Forum. For those media friends and even the bloggers, please don't forget to message me and our office for our gifts to you. We have pastries and pandesal as our tradition from 83-year-old Kamuning Bakery Cafe. Please text. And also, thank you for all the speakers reminding us. Sabi nga ni Ka Herman Tom Laurel here said in his closing remarks that we have been left behind in foreign direct investments attractiveness in the 1980s. When the Japanese invested all over ASEAN, we were left behind. Then the Koreans came, we were left behind. The Taiwanese came, we were left behind. Now China is the ultimate rising power. We should not be left behind again. Thank you to all the reminders of everyone. We shall have another Pandesal Forum tomorrow, a very unique one. We'll invite all the media again tomorrow morning. Thank you. Be safe. Have a good day. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to Miss Ana Malindog-Uy, most especially for her hard work and efforts.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Henry. Thank you.
We will send a recording of this to all the media friends. You just please email or text. And don't forget to text where we could send you our pandesal and pastries as our traditional gift from Pandesal Forum.
I think Tetchi is raising her hand. Yeah.
No. I'm just saying bye-bye, Henry.
Thank you, Ms. Tetchi Capellan. Alam niyo ba, Ms. Tetchi, in the future, you should have one entire session just talking about alternative energy and solar. What you just said earlier, was an eye-opener for me. I
Well.
thought I'm well-read already, but that entire sector of yours is very important. We should...
Well, the place during the early years, yeah.
Yes. And Ms. Tetchi, baka hindi niyo alam may nagmarites sa akin na si Dr. Henry Limbon was for the Agriculture Secretary portfolio at the start of a few years ago.
Yes, I know.
He declined because he
I know.
wanted to
I know
serve
that.
public service sa FFCCCII president.
I know. That's why
You know that.
yeah, we that is something that we miss. They should have
Thank you
sat
very
there.
much. And thank you to everyone.
Also, thank you to
comment on that. Yeah, your sound, Dr. Lim, you're saying something. Thank you to everyone. Thank you
I want
once
to thank
again.
Pete, for mentioning about agriculture during his opening statement.
Yes. Dr. Lim, Pete Lavinia's wife is one of the foremost leaders also in agriculture. Experts at coffee and other crops.
Dr. Henry Lim is also the hybrid king. Can you also share, Dr. Henry, how many farmers and the improved yield of our farming thanks to helping cooperation with foreign partners?
Yeah. We should have a session entirely on that again, Dr. Lim. Kasi I think time wouldn't be enough. Kasi ang galing mga ginawa niya for Filipino rice farmers. That is another cooperation between Philippines and China.
A real successful project, and thanks to Dr.
Yes. And also thank you for your economic forecast of 6.5 to 7.5 economic growth. If not worsening this pandemic, we will continue to have strong economic recovery. Thank you very much to everyone. Good.